I now call to order the Planning Commission meeting of January 9th, 2019. Roll call, Commissioner Becker, could you do the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Salome?
Here.
Commissioner Ikezi?
Present.
Commissioner Kelly?
Here.
Commissioner Williams? Commissioner Becker here? And Chair Jane?
Here. Is there a motion to excuse Commissioner Williams?
Yes, I'll motion.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Becker, seconded by Commissioner Salem. All in favor? Or
Aye.
Do we have to do it here?
Got it.
Was it a voice vote or was it?
Yes, it was a voice vote.
So I vote affirmative. Okay. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Remain standing for the statement of values.
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Public hearings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the commission directs all activity during the hearings. All comments shall be addressed to the commission. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent hearing. Applicants will be allotted up to 10 minutes to present and justify proposals following staff presentation of the item. Other speakers will be given up to 2 minutes. The applicant is allotted up to 5 minutes for rebuttal of comments. No additional comments will be accepted upon the close of the public hearing, although the Commission reserves the right to direct questions to any speaker on any matter. Special procedures, time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the Chair. Appeal of Commission actions must be filed in writing within 7 calendar days. Copies of the current agenda are on the table by the door there. They're also available in advance at the Planning Division office on the Friday afternoon preceding the meeting and available online. Are there any requests of applicants, the public, or the commission for a continuance or exception for any of the items on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, okay. We move on to the consent calendar. The procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted, approved, or adopted by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. If any member of the Architectural Committee, staff, the applicant, or a member of the public wishes to comment on a consent calendar item or would like the item to be heard on the regular agenda, please notify the planning staff or request this action at the Planning Commission meeting during the consent calendar review, which is now. Items listed on the consent calendar with associated file numbers constitute public hearing items. Secretary Becker, would you please read the consent calendar for the record?
Absolutely. First consent item we have is item 1A, 19-1667, the Planning Commission minutes of December 12th, 2018. And then we have item 1B, which is 19-1207, action on use permit for ABC license type 41 for Shake Shack located at 2855 Stevens Creek Boulevard.
Are there any motions to pull items? Yes. Okay. that will be heard as part of the regular hearings. Is there a motion to approve the balance of the consent? Oh, I'm sorry. No, I don't see you.
No? Okay.
Okay.
Oh, okay. How about now?
No, I don't see
No?
you.
Okay. But I'd like to pull up the minutes.
Okay. So Commissioner Ikezi is pulling the minutes. So there's nothing left on the consent calendar. We will now move to public presentations. Would any member of the public like to discuss anything that is not on the agenda for tonight? Seeing none, is there a motion? Oh, we don't need a. Okay, so now, I'm sorry. Okay, so now we will move on with items that were pulled from the consent calendar. So Commissioner Ikezi pulled the minutes. Would you like to?
Yes. I noticed that there are several items where Commissioner Kelly is mentioned as the person who made the motion and seconding the motion on several items. I can't download the minutes right now. I'm having a problem again, but so I wasn't sure if that was correct.
Yes, that would definitely be an error and procedurally incorrect. So do you have the items identified?
It was for all of the consent item
consent
items.
items,
At the
okay.
beginning of the consent calendar, it says Commissioner Ikezi had motioned and Commissioner Kelly had seconded, but then under each item, it says Commissioner Kelly motioned and seconded. So,
Okay, so we will change that to, for each item that the motion was made by Commissioner Ikezi, and then the second will remain as Kelly
Correct, yeah.
for those items. We'll
That's all
make
for
that
me.
change. Is there anything else?
okay, is there a motion to?
Motion to approve the minutes with that minor change.
A second? Okay, moved by Commissioner Ikezi, seconded by Commissioner Kelly. Will it come up on our screens here?
And may I ask, are we having still issues with the Wi-Fi again? Is that why it's cycling?
I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
Are we still having issues with the Wi-Fi? Is that why we're cycling so long? Okay.
What do you mean by cycling? It just took a while for it to come up, but it's now up, right?
No, well, I'm talking about opening up attachments.
Oh, yeah, there is
I've opened
there is
attachment.
an issue with one of the attachments, that there's something wrong with Granicus. Because when I tried to download the attachments, it said that there was an error, and I pointed that out to the IT folks that were here earlier. So they know, I think there's a corruption of one of the files in the attachments.
Okay.
So,
I just tried to open the minutes, and I have a hard copy, but it is giving me, it says
yeah,
unknown
yeah,
error.
yeah, an unknown
for
error.
10.
I ran into the
That's,
same error.
that's the problem, but we can go ahead and vote, because it just pulled up. So please vote on approving the minutes. Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you.
And pardon me, Mr. Chair, I was asleep at the wheel earlier. I forgot to jump in. Because there are only 5 planning commissioners present, it's incumbent to notify all members of the public and the applicants that a minimum of 4 votes are required to approve any item on the planning commission agenda. Therefore, any applicant who wishes to ask for a continuance tonight, we always grant that if they would prefer to come back at a meeting when there are more commissioners present.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to item B. Would the staff like to present this item?
Yes, Chair Jane, I think the applicant is really only requesting to alter the hours of operation and the service of the beer and wine with food. That's what he expressed to the project manager, Steve Lee, earlier today. So I think he is just making that request.
So, okay, that's the staff presentation. Would the applicant like to present on this item?
So thank you for hearing this case. I have requested this application to be pulled from the consent calendar, confirm and request a modification to propose conditions of approval C5, which limits the hours of operations. Shake Shack has recently proposed modifications of the hours of operation to request the restaurant to be permitted to be open until 12 midnight on Friday and Saturday nights. Shake Shack also requests the ability to sell beer and wine and food items until 12 on Friday and Saturday nights and close at 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday nights. If the commission does have concern with this additional hour of operation, Shake Shacks will be willing to accept permitting the sale of food and items until 12 midnight and continue the limit of sale and beer wine until 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. Thank you.
Is there any questions of the applicant? My thing has locked up here. I can't close the speaker list. So why don't we proceed? Commissioner Casey, would you like to
Yeah,
ask
my
questions
question
of
is,
the applicant?
so when is the Shake Shack gonna open in Valley Fair?
So Shake Shack would open at 11 a.m. and then
Which month?
to open like fully to the public,
Yes.
we're still in planning review, building review. We have yet to get a permit as well, so we haven't begun construction yet.
Oh, I see. This year?
Yes.
Thank you.
No, see, my iPad is locked up, so we're going to have to use the lights again. Okay, Commissioner Kelly.
I had a question for staff. So I know we have the movie theater going in, and they're going to be serving alcohol and food as well. What is their hours of operation?
I apologize, I don't remember the exact hours, but I think their last, I believe their last showing ends close to midnight. So I believe that midnight was their cutoff time, but they
And
would stop serving alcohol. I believe it's an hour before the end of a movie,
So which would be about 11
about 11 o'clock. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But across the street at Santana Road, they would still be serving alcohol later than that, correct?
Until 2 a.m. It depends on whether their hours are restricted, but under ABC or California state law, they can serve till 2 a.m.
Right. Is there going to be other
What did he have to do?
businesses?
That serve alcohol in Valley Fair?
Serving alcohol?
Yes, there are actually several restaurants in Valley Fair that serve beer and wine. So there's actually a Japanese restaurant. It's moving in that direction where the malls are actually converting a lot of the space to restaurants, and a lot of those would say serve alcohol.
And are they serving till midnight or till like 11?
Whatever hours are available in the mall, because some are accessible from the exterior and others are from the interior. So, the other types of the food court items probably don't serve beer and wine as much. Maybe a few of those do, but there are independent restaurants that are separate tenants and have tenant spaces that are accessible. Again, like California Pizza Kitchen. There's others around from the exterior of the mall that have direct access, so they would have longer hours than the mall.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ikezi, do you have another question?
No.
Okay, what's happened now is that my machine is working. So I have a couple of questions. first, I welcome the fact that we have something that's open past 9 o'clock in Santa Clara. And so is there a condition where if there were people hanging out there and we had some police requests or calls because people were loitering or it was late, to change the hours? Or once it's, I guess this is to staff.
Once the hours are set under the use permit, they would
Yeah.
not be able to be revisited unless there was some failure to comply with the other conditions. So you could not revisit them unless a new use permit was filed or they violated other terms of the use permit.
Okay, but in the past, we've had like 6-month review and
Yes,
12-month
you've had
reviews of
that
the
as-
alcohol.
Right, but that would only be, say, in the worst-case scenario, there's a process called revocation of a use permit, and that has its own process, and that's the only avenue to change the conditions of approval, unless you stipulate that the hours are tentative and they can be effective after a certain period of time.
Well, I'm just wondering, could we approve the hours to be to midnight with food and alcohol?
Yes.
And then say that if there's police activity, we come back and do a 6-month review? We've done that in the past. That's been our standard operating procedure.
Well, we provide a report whether or not there is police activity, and if that activity is directly connected to the business in question. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's just,
I understand.
environment.
Right.
Or somebody could be there that's not really a patron of a business. So we have to distinguish that. But
But-
that, you could not really retract the hours unless you had something quantifiable that you'd say more service calls than, one per
But-
month or something of that nature.
But as I recall in the past, when we had an establishment that asked for a beer and wine, we had a 6-month and a 12-month review.
Yes.
And if there were police activity, we could revoke the alcohol license, right?
You could not revoke it then. You would have to start the process, which is, as I mentioned, a revocation process. And what that does is you have to basically start a notice of intent to revoke. Then it goes forward. Then you set it for public hearing. The applicant has a chance to respond. And then you would conduct the hearing at a separate, it's actually a multi-step process.
Right, but then why at 6 months does it come back to us? Let's say we vote not to approve the 6-month.
That is really as an FYI that you have the opportunity to revisit the appropriateness of the use permit, and you could initiate that process if it was warranted. But we always try to gain voluntary compliance first rather than go that route. But
I fully understand that. So I guess what I would ask is that we go to 12 o'clock, but then we have a 6-month review.
yeah, that does not expedite the revocation process, if that's
Okay.
your question.
Well, it just comes back to us.
You would have to
Yeah.
condition it differently. You can condition it to have a 6-month and 12-month review, and then those hours would be effective after that 1 year. Otherwise, they'd have to go back to 11 o'clock. We could do that. That way, you don't get involved in the revocation process.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you're saying. I personally would like to approve it to midnight for both
You want an
alcohol.
easier process to adjust the hours, is what you're saying.
If there's problems.
If warranted. Okay.
Yes.
So then you can condition the hours to basically be till 12 o'clock, but have a 6-month and 12-month review. And if there are police calls that you would be aware of based on these reports, you could restrict the hours to 11 o'clock
That's what I
after
want.
1 year.
That's
So we
exactly
could just
what I
write a
want.
condition to that effect.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I understand.
Okay, that's what I would like to do, so.
Okay.
any-
Okay, I make a
any-
motion
So
to-
wait, we have to ask the public if the
Oh,
public
that's
would
right.
like to comment on this item. Seeing none, is there a motion to close public? Oh,
Close public
oh,
hearing.
Commissioner Becker, sorry.
So Commissioner Kelly brought up a good point, and it's about the movie theater. The movie theaters usually, I've noticed during summer hours, when there's a major movie, they usually have midnight showings, especially if it's a major release. So is this movie theater going to be staying like that open until after midnight in that area? I mean, because I'm just curious if midnight shouldn't be a problem if they're going to be going past that for a movie theater time.
Again, I don't believe that the movie theater was allowed to stay open past 12. I think because that was actually their own operational standard.
Oh, okay,
That they
okay.
don't, and they actually stopped serving alcohol an hour or so
Before
before,
the movie,
yeah, the
okay.
end of the movie. So if they were to have a midnight showing, they would not be able to serve alcohol if the limits were till 12 p.m.
How close is this going to be to the movie theater, the Shake Shack?
Very close.
Yeah.
Very
Pretty
close.
close?
We don't have, there's not that much of the retail portion that's in Santa Clara, so they would
Okay.
relatively be, yeah, close by.
Okay, good. Just, this is going to be really busy, so I just want to make sure.
Okay, was there a motion to close public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing.
Second.
Okay, made by Commissioner Kelly, seconded by Commissioner Casey. All in favor? Oh, wait, we have to wait for it.
You wait for the, yeah, for the screen to, okay.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Any discussion? Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Becker,
I'll make the motion to approve with your recommendations towards the hours. I think you said where we can review it after 6 months. Was that what we were saying?
So we would revise condition number 5 to allow a 12 o'clock closing with food service and 6 and 12-month reviews. And then should there be excessive number of police calls, we would restrict the hours to 11 p.m. after
Correct.
the 1 year.
that's correct.
I'd like to put those on there for the motion.
Second.
Okay, made by Commissioner Becker, seconded by Commissioner Casey. Passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So that, just a reminder that it is effective as of today with 7 days for an appeal.
Correct. There's 7-day appeal in writing. Okay, moving on to the agendized items. We have one item, agenda. Commissioner Becker, would you like to read the item?
Yes. Our 2 items tonight we have under the public hearing is item 2, which is 19-1700, the selection of the Planning Commission Vice Chair. And we have item 3, which is 19-1661, public hearing action on use permit to allow the conversion of a service station building into a retail convenience store and potential restaurant at 3725 El Camino Real.
Okay, so now we're on to the selection of the Planning Commission Vice Chair. So from the last meeting, we had 2 commissioners that were interested in this position. Are there any others? Okay, so the 2 commissioners that were interested in this job were Commissioner Becker and Commissioner Salem. I believe the way this works is that we will vote for each of them independently, and whoever garners the most votes would then be our vice chair. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So
Only once?
you vote only once. Well, I mean, you would vote for, you could vote no for one, but I'd prefer, I don't know.
Making sure.
Just vote once.
ourselves, right?
Yeah,
Either way.
okay.
Yeah, you can have a vote on Commissioner X, and everybody votes yes or no, and then you could have a vote on Commissioner Y. yes or no, or you could just say, everybody in favor of Commissioner X, everybody in favor
Okay.
of Commissioner Y.
Okay. So we will go in alphabetical order, which means that Commissioner Becker will be first. So we are now voting on Commissioner Becker for vice chair.
Well, you don't need a second for nominations. I would just put down the chair as the maker of the motion.
We don't vote on this, right?
No, you vote on it.
We vote?
Yes,
Oh.
of course. Just like for the president, you vote for yourself.
Oh.
And we need 4 votes to pass?
No.
Just a
Just a
majority,
majority,
simple
right?
Just the
majority.
majority. Okay, 3 votes. Okay, now, we will now vote for Commissioner Salem.
3 and automatic.
Pretty much. I just want to
Someone
go
wants to
through the motions.
Sure. Can you call for the votes then?
Oh, would you please vote? Okay. All right, so we have a new vice chair. Commissioner Becker, congratulations.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, this is to fill the partial term vacated by Raj Shahal.
Oh, yeah.
So this would just go till July, when
Okay,
you would change again.
I see. Okay. All right.
I got a curious question about that now. So
So, yeah, we would now need a secretary.
secretary, okay.
So now we need to vote on secretary?
Nominate a secretary?
We nominate.
It's not agendized.
Do we have to agendize it?
Did not agendize it. I'm sorry. You're going to have to do that at the next meeting.
Okay. So you have 2 hats right now.
You take nominations right now, or
Oh,
I
I
mean,
guess
just,
we
I
could
mean,
take
I'm
nomination.
sorry, just interest poll, so we can have an
Okay.
idea for next time.
We nominate
So
somebody?
first, could I have Commissioner Becker describe the position?
Sure. Sure. Okay, well, the role of secretary is calling off attendance, going, pretty much reading off the agenda for the consent calendar and also for the public hearing items. And I think that's pretty much it for secretary. Oh, statement of values, reading the statement of values.
I think all of you can do that.
Are we able to nominate somebody ourselves, or are we?
The nomination would be we have to agendize that.
Oh,
but,
sorry.
You can just take an interest list, so we can include that for next time.
Anybody interested?
Oh. The new guy down.
Expressing interest, so we will have a vote at the next meeting. Okay. That will be agendized for the next meeting. Okay, now we're moving on to the second item, which is the use permit for the conversion of a service station building into a retail convenience store and potential restaurant. Item 191661. Is there a staff presentation?
Yeah, so good evening. So yeah, this is a request to modify, a request for a use permit to modify an existing conditional use of the property at the northeast corner of Halford Avenue and the El Camino Real there. That property was developed with a service station as part of the construction of the larger Lawrence Expressway Plaza Shopping Center that you see surrounding it to the north and to the east. Here's a street view photo showing the service station. The 3 auto service bays at the right are the subject of the proposed conversion into the larger retail convenience store. Here's the proposed site plan. The proposed project would remove one of the existing driveways on the site on El Camino Real and fill it in with an expanded landscaped area, rehabilitated landscaping, including some new street trees. The project would also restripe the parking lot to create 10 on-site parking spaces, which would exceed the minimum of 8 spaces required for service station uses with retail component. The project would also reconstruct a trash enclosure at the northeast rear corner of the property that had been demolished at some point in time, and would also install a Class 1 bicycle locker and Class 2 bike rack on site. Here's the existing floor plan of the site. On the left is the existing snack shop and retail space. On the right are the 3 auto service bays. So the project would remove the hydraulic lifts in those service bays and remodel the space to become the larger retail convenience store you see here on the right. And that would leave the left or west side of the building to become a future potential restaurant space. The use permit for a service station is, the zoning standards are specific to the range of uses that are allowed. So this request also includes the proposed off-site sale of beer and wine. It's an ABC Type 20 license in a convenience store, but does not propose to serve any alcoholic beverages within the restaurant space. And in addition, the proposed hours of operation would coincide with the existing fueling station, which is 6 a.m. to midnight every day of the week. The proposed cashier station for the service station would be situated within the convenience store. Here's an elevation of the proposed storefront changes that they're minimal. They include replacement of the auto service doors with new storefront glass and door system and some new siding below to match the building materials. So the current general plan designation for the site is a regional mixed use, and it's also part of the city's current El Camino Real focus area. These policies within the current focus area call for creating pedestrian-oriented retail uses, and also creating a substantial landscaped area at this particular corner. So the applicant is proposing to increase the landscaping in an effort to satisfy that general plan policy, and also through the removal of the auto service bays and the creation of the retail space would further bring the property into compliance with the vision that we have currently. The current zoning for the site is community commercial, as well as that for the surrounding properties to the north and east and west. To the south, we have an existing service station at the southeast corner of El Camino and Halford. And then next to that is a larger mixed-use plan development of residential and retail under construction. A service station is a conditionally permitted use, as are the ancillary uses that might occur with it, including the convenience store, the off-site sale of beer and wine, and other retail uses that the Planning Commission may approve. The project is exempt from CEQA per section 150303.
Could you speak a little closer to the
Oh,
microphone?
sorry. Yeah, the project is exempt from CEQA per section 15303, and that it would convert an existing small building from one use to another retail use. And the staff is, with that, recommending that the commission adopt a resolution approving the use permit to allow the conversion of the existing service station building for a convenience store with off-site beer and wine sales and a potential restaurant that would not serve beer and wine on the property at 3725 El Camino Real.
Okay. Commissioner Becker, do you have any questions?
My question is for a small, what you're saying is a potential restaurant, are we talking like Subway or something, like kind of like most gas stations I've noticed been doing? They have like a Subway next to a little grocery, little mini mart inside. Is that what they're looking at? Or
Yeah, that's what the applicant has proposed in their project statement, was a light restaurant, and they mentioned included sandwiches in that description.
Okay. And there's, and I was reading here too, it says they're still going to continue to sell gas to, it's like it's a.
Correct.
Pretty
yeah.
much they're doing, I think we had a project similar to this over on Lawrence Expressway where they removed the garages to put a mini mart in there too. So is that kind of the similar thing that we're looking at here?
That's correct, yeah. The service station received approval a while back to convert from a full service into a self-service station.
Okay.
And so that now this is an evolution from that to make a use of the service station building.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Do you know what's going on in the rest of that property? I mean, the Orchard Supply, and is there any publicly announced?
We had an inquiry for a gym at that location, but I don't know if they're proceeding with the
That would be good. That would be good.
So, but
in terms of
that's a pretty big
redevelopment.
property there.
In terms of
To
the
put a gym
redevelopment.
in where the Orchard was, that's pretty, yeah. But you haven't heard of anything else going on there?
Not
So there's
really
not like a comprehensive
redevelopment
plan
on the
for
side
this whole
Yeah,
thing?
not
Okay.
at this time.
Okay. And then I think Jeff and I discussed this. The trees along El Camino Real will be canopy trees of the scale of El Camino Real. So they'll be large trees. Is that
Yes,
correct? Yeah.
We've reviewed that with the applicant, and they are willing, and they can address you on planting new sycamore trees to create
Okay.
some large street canopy plantings.
Very good. And then will the sidewalk be 10 feet wide at that location?
Well, the sidewalk flares out a little bit at the end, but it stays in its current configuration as predominantly an 8-foot sidewalk.
No way to get it to 10 feet? That's sort of our plan for El Camino, right?
Yeah, well, we hadn't included that as a recommended condition of approval, given that this is a tenant improvement within an existing building rather
I
than a
see.
reconstruction and larger development that might go in.
Okay, okay. All right, that's all I had. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, would the applicant like to present? You have 10 minutes. No? Okay. Okay. Would the public, like to speak on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion to close public? Oh, would you like to talk about your project? Come forward.
Trying to improve that whole area.
Yeah.
So right now, remove the Bay Area station and put some convenience store and maybe Subway or tacos. A lot of apartments is coming to serve everybody the purpose.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what we are trying to.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, is there a motion to close public hearing?
Motion.
Made by Commissioner Becker, seconded by Commissioner Kelly. We will vote on that now. Okay, passes unanimously? Okay, any discussion? Wait. Commissioner Becker.
Well, he just said, I was going to say, I would like to make the motion to approve this item mainly because we don't have many gas stations left in Santa Clara, so I'm really glad you guys are keeping a gas station here and adding a convenience store in it, so.
Second?
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, so Commissioner Becker made the motion to approve. Commissioner Kelly seconded. Okay, passes unanimously. You're approved. There are 7 days to appeal this item in writing, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. All right. Now we're on to we have a study session on due process and housing legislation. So I'm disappointed that your attendance is so poor for your presentation, but
Well,
hopefully everyone's watching it online.
For good or bad, our meetings are permanently posted on the city's website, so Commissioner Williams and others can view it whenever they want.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Chair, my name is Alexander Abbey. I'm the Assistant City Attorney. Tonight, I'm going to speak to you on two completely disparate topics, housing legislation and due process. Those of you who were on the commission a year ago remember that I gave you a presentation on 2017 housing legislation. That was a very big year for housing bills with a total of 15 different laws passed. 2018 wasn't quite such a bumper crop for housing bills, but there were nevertheless several bills that the legislature passed that are relevant to Santa Clara. And Commissioner Kelly has been hounding me for the last 2 months to talk about them. So I will be talking about those tonight. I also am going to talk about the totally separate topic of due process, which will either be an introduction or a refresher, depending on how long you've been on the Planning Commission. It's important to your roles as planning commissioners. Some of you have heard this part of the speech before, but it's timely because the city attorney just gave a memo to the city council raising some due process issues with respect to the architectural review process. So I wanted to make sure you were clued in on that as well. But let's start with the housing legislation. First, I mentioned I talked to you a lot about 2017 bills last year, so let me just give you an update on 4 of those. If you'll recall, one of the main bills that was passed in 2017 was AB 1505, the Inclusionary Housing Bill, which restored, finally, the authority of the city to require that a percentage of housing units in all new development be provided to lower income households. The city promptly took advantage of that and enacted a 15% inclusionary requirement for residential rental housing, in addition to for sale housing. We put in a fairly generous phase-in provision in our ordinance. Most developments that were submitted before August 1st, 2018 weren't subject to the new law, and so we got quite a few applications on July 31st. That being said, future development applications will be subject to this 15% inclusionary requirement. So hopefully that'll start to make a dent in providing some additional affordable units. SB 35 was one that got a lot of press. It was the streamlining bill. And it said that the city would have to grant ministerial approval to certain infill housing projects that meet the general plan and zoning requirements for cities that haven't been on track to meet their RHNA goals. So RHNA, again, is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It's our numerical goal in the housing element that we have to meet over an 8-year period, or at least have to try to meet. So that went into effect January 1st, 2018, and it had a process where the State Department of Housing and Community Development would look at each city's compliance with the housing goals, and then for ones it decided were out of compliance, would impose this requirement. And so, you know, January 1st, 2018, our first housing element report of 2018 was due in April 2018, so we figured HCD would have the first batch of cities that are subject to this new law, maybe in the fall of 2018. And they surprised everyone because on January 31st, 2018, they published the list of cities that were not in compliance. And 98% of cities in California were on this list, including, of course, our fair city. I think I have the map here of cities in the Bay Area that HCD determined were subject to SB 35 ministerial approvals. Most of the cities are that sort of brown color, and if you can make out the line, Santa Clara is one of those in the brown color. There's 2 categories of cities: those subject to a 50% affordability requirement and those subject to a 10%. We are one of the 50% cities. So if a developer comes in with a project that's consistent with the general plan and zoning and it's 50% affordable, the city has to approve it ministerially. Cities that are in blue have to do the same for projects that are just 10% affordable. Now, needless to say, you would have heard about it. We have not yet gotten an application for a 50% affordable project that would be subject to this. But I'm sure you all did hear about the Sand Hill Development Project in Cupertino. That got a lot of press for something like 2,400 dwelling units. They applied in March, and it was approved ministerially in September. So it'll be interesting to see if this crops up in Santa Clara in the future.
May I ask a quick question?
Absolutely, and feel free to.
What are the grounds, the residents are opposing it? What is their legal grounds for, you know, opposing the project?
For
in Cupertino.
You know, honestly, I haven't read the legal challenge.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I could look into
So-
that for you.
I could,
I can just mention this, since I didn't meet with folks at Cupertino, that what the residents are challenging is actually what the city tried to do is create like a specific plan, so there would be community benefits package. And since that's really the only challengeable aspect that they can rescind since it was adopted by the city council, that's what they're going after. And unfortunately, that's where, that was to try to make this project even give some community you know, benefits such as parks and open space and other things of that nature, but that's what they're actually challenging. So the other one, essentially, they have no ability to overturn.
It's enough to halt the whole project?
well, so what I had heard,
No.
Sand Hill proposed a project. The residents didn't like it. The council rejected it. Sand Hill came back and said, we are going to apply on SB 35 and we're just going to do this project. Then the city countered with another project. And Sand Hill said, you know what? By the time we go through all this countering and everything, it's going to take so long, we're just going to do our SB 35. And that's what they're doing.
Is that about it?
Mm-hmm.
So what the current, I guess, council is suing over is that it doesn't have community benefits like a park.
Well, it does have a lot of open space, but I think they were trying to control the process, essentially. So,
Which is the whole reason for SB 35 for cities that aren't doing enough to provide housing.
especially, well, the other thing is that they're subject to challenge if it's a legislative action. So now, basically with state law, I think the challenge period is passed unless they try to find that some constitutionality with the approval.
And
That sounds right, but I haven't reviewed it, I'm sorry.
can I ask Xander what, I guess because this is so new, no one's really challenged it successfully yet, correct?
Cupertino's sort of the forefront of everything. Everybody sort of was
But-
watching it to see how it,
Is a judge suspended their work on their
not to my
project?
knowledge, no.
So they're challenging it, but they can't stop the construction of it.
Unless there's a stay. And again, I apologize, I wasn't prepared to talk about the Cupertino litigation
No, I'm
today.
just talking about, because this could theoretically come up because the numbers. And then are there any of the 10% cities that are close to us?
Just, if you can make them out, it looks like Hayward's one of them. I can't, my vision has gone
So
downhill.
if they're a
but-
10% city, they're really not doing their housing numbers.
Correct. They are further off track than we are.
Okay. All right. Well, good news is we'll have 2 beautiful 24-story towers to look at.
Well, oh, in Cupertino, you
In
mean?
Cupertino, because it's adjacent to us. I mean, I should be able to see it from my house.
Maybe they'll be a really nice design. I don't know. All right, I should really get back to it.
Okay.
Because we haven't even started on the 2018 bills. Let me just mention the 2017 bills, the no net loss rules. That was the bills that related to sites listed in the housing element. The city can't disapprove projects on sites that are listed in the housing element or approve projects at a lower density than what's listed in the housing element unless we make some onerous findings and unless we rezone other sites within 180 days. We haven't denied any projects on sites listed in the housing element in 2018, so it just hasn't come up yet.
Okay, so can I just ask a question on that?
Yes.
Because we do have housing, was it high density along the El Camino, correct? Or what's the housing element? Because
Yeah, the inventory includes a lot of sites that are on El Camino, yes.
okay, so with this, we cannot rezone it and just say it just has to be commercial then. So if it's currently mixed use with a housing element, we can't rezone it back just to commercial, correct?
Correct, without making some onerous findings and identifying alternate sites to replace the ones we're taking off the element. So we could theoretically do it, cut 90 units off this site if we simultaneously rezone another site so it has 90 more units.
Which is very difficult to do,
Yes.
so it's probably not going to happen. Okay.
Very difficult. But again, we haven't denied, I polled the planners and asked how many projects did we deny in 2018 anyway, and the only one we could think of was 1530 to 1540 Pomeroy, which was an 8-unit townhome development. It's not on one of the housing element sites. It also was requiring a PD rezone, so it wasn't consistent with the zoning ordinance. Had it been consistent with the zoning ordinance, we might have had issues with the Housing Accountability Act.
Xander, actually, the Moonlight Lanes project was denied, and that was, I think, 160.
In 2018? I think that predated
Is that
2018.
2017? Okay.
Yeah, it came back with a
Okay,
with a
with the
smaller
revised, yeah.
development in 2018. Housing Accountability Act, that's the one that says if you have housing projects that are consistent with the general plan, consistent with the zoning ordinance, you can't disapprove a housing project or reduce the density unless you make specific findings that there'd be an adverse impact to public health or safety. So again, no projects have been subject to this yet, but stay tuned. So let's finally get to 2018. I'm going to talk to you about 7 or 8 bills, starting with a simple one about some fee waivers for seniors, a few changes to the housing element laws. There's a new law requiring that we allow supportive housing by right in multifamily zones. Another law will provide density bonuses for student housing. There's another law that introduces a new kind of density bonus, floor area ratio bonuses. There's some changes to the Housing Accountability Act, and then there are some changes to the laws that are specific to charter cities, of which, of course, we are one. So just as an appetizer, let me start with a simple senior building fees. This law, I liked it because it was only one page. And it basically says the city can waive or reduce building fees for home improvements of seniors. And seniors in this context is defined as 60 years or older. Now, this is only when the senior needs to make a change to their home to accommodate a disability, either mental or physical. So if a senior needs to install a ramp, the city can decide as a policy matter to waive building permit fees for those seniors. So, you know, Aunt Mabel wants to build a craft room, you don't get to waive the fees. But if you want to install a ramp, the city can, as a policy matter, decide that's something we should do for our seniors. We just have to adopt a simple ordinance.
So does that actually apply to improvements that are like landscaping to accommodate mobility disabled people?
It could be. If it's something to accommodate a disability, then absolutely. Again, it's not automatic. The city would have to pass a law to do this, but we could. Okay.
It says the city has to pass a law to do it.
Well, the city does not have to enact the law. It could decide we don't want to provide any waivers. If we want to provide the waivers, the only way to do that is by passing an ordinance. It's not
So
automatic.
if you do it for one, you have to do it for all, is what you're saying.
Yes, you can't have just, you know,
Yeah.
piecemeal,
Arbitrary.
you know,
Got
you
it.
get a waiver, but not you. So then a few bills modified the housing element process. So you're probably sort of familiar with the RHNA allocation process. For every housing element cycle, each council of governments gets a number from the state for their entire region. How many units do you have to build? And then that council of governments decides for each and every city how many units that city has to build. There have been complaints that the process is somewhat political. In the Bay Area, of course, our Council of Governments is ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. But some examples in Los Angeles, in the last cycle, Redondo Beach was allocated about 1,400 dwelling units, while nearby Manhattan Beach and Hermosa Beach, which were very similar communities, were assigned 37 units and 2 units. And so that was seen as inequitable by some. So to address some of these inequities, the first bill, 828, changes some of the justifications that people have used to reduce their RHNA. The fact that you didn't meet your target in the last cycle is not a justification for a lower target in the next cycle. Similarly, the fact that your population has not gone up a lot since the last cycle is not a justification for a low number. It doesn't matter that your population is static. Under the second bill, it requires RHNA allocations to be more data-driven and more transparency in the process, along with more state oversight in the allocation process earlier in the process. One of the data points they look at is jobs housing imbalance. So actually this one might result in a bigger RHNA allocation for Santa Clara because a jobs-rich community is now more likely to get higher RHNA allocation. It's a more transparent allocation process as well with, you have to post all the information on a website.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, that one's going to try to bring into balance jobs and housing within a community.
Well, it's one of the data points that the Council of Governments will have to consider when they decide how many housing units to provide.
Okay.
So yeah, with the goal of getting more balanced, yeah, they'll put more housing in communities that are jobs rich. Finally, 686 just adds some housing discrimination provisions to the requirements for housing elements. We're going to have an analysis of how we can affirmatively further fair housing It's a term of art, AFFH. There's already an AFFH requirement in federal law for HUD money recipients, requiring HUD grantees to certify that they're taking steps to affirmatively further fair housing, such as taking measures to reduce patterns of segregated housing. That bill and the other bills will really only come into play when we do our next housing element update in about 4 years. Okay, AB 2162, supportive housing. This authorizes supportive housing by right in all multifamily zones and all mixed-use zones, regardless of what our zoning ordinance says. Supportive housing is housing that is targeted to the homeless population. So our zoning ordinance already allows for the development of emergency shelters in the city's light industrial zone, the ML zone, but not in multifamily zones, not in mixed-use zones. So this new law trumps our zoning ordinance. It requires this by right with no amendment by the city necessary. It's immediately effective. So what qualifies as supportive housing? Well, that's a housing development where 100% of the units are affordable to low-income households. That means less than or equal to 80% AMI. And a minimum of 25% of the units, no less than 12, have to be restricted to homeless persons. The developer will also have to provide certain on-site supportive services. There's certain square footage requirement for those services. That's things like community rooms, computer rooms, community kitchens, case management offices. And the developer will have to submit a plan with their application for how they'll provide those supportive services. The city can still impose objective written development standards to supportive housing. They'll just be the same standards that would apply to any multifamily residential development. But we can't deny them based on the fact that they're supportive housing. Also, if the project's within 1/2 mile of a transit stop, we cannot require any parking for such developments.
Okay, and so if they were going to build something like this, it would still have to be in a multifamily zone, is what you're saying?
Multifamily or mixed use, yes.
Or mixed use, okay.
No single-family zones.
So will this apply to that property at the corner of Monroe and St. Thomas, if they were to come back?
It's not zoned for multifamily yet.
Oh, I see.
So are you saying that if there's a parcel that's zoned for multifamily on El Camino Real, and the developer comes to us and says, I want to do a supportive housing project here, we cannot deny it, but that unit has to have 100% of the units affordable.
Yes.
25% of the people are formerly homeless.
Yes.
And so in order for the developer to ask for this, they have to provide all of these things.
Yes.
So it puts a burden on them to make sure they provide all
Absolutely,
these.
including this plan for supportive services. They have to
Right.
prove that they meet all these requirements.
Okay.
If they meet them all, then we can't say no.
Okay.
And
got it.
assuming they meet all the other standards, like, the minimum setbacks for multifamily development in that zone.
These are
So,
all connected by and, not or.
Correct, they have to meet
Okay.
all of those requirements in order to qualify as supportive housing.
Did the,
I've, go ahead.
yeah, I have
please.
one too. Did the 2904 Corvin project?
Wait, I'm sorry, I
fall-
couldn't hear.
Did the 2904 Corvin project fall under this law, or was that already well in progress?
Well, that one, in the case of, it's in the Lawrence Station Plan. Is that one in the Lawrence Station Plan? And so it's already zoned for, that's an allowable use along one of the specified land uses that are available under the plan.
Right, but as I understand the project, it fits every single criteria of this housing law. So it was surprising to see it going through any review. That's all.
Okay, but is this one, I guess, yeah, I don't think they proposed it for homeless. It really is just affordable housing.
And again, this is for low income, so if that development has any moderate units, it wouldn't qualify. I don't know if it does.
Yeah, it's 100% affordable.
If you drew,
Yeah,
if you drew a circle, around, a half-mile circle around every bus stop, that would probably cover eight.
Most of the
It's like
city.
San
Just a-
Francisco
yeah.
had this problem. It would cover probably 70% of the city, right?
We did
Yeah,
that,
it-
that exercise, and just about every place is available.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another law later that uses the word major transit stop. This one just says transit stop. So yeah, it's pretty much the whole city.
And so
So,
that means no parking in these developments.
Correct.
Okay.
so question about the supportive housing though is, has anyone in the state or county, has our city even got an application for this? I mean, has any of this been enacted anywhere yet?
This law has been effective for 9 days.
Oh.
Not to my knowledge.
Oh, my bad. I thought this
All
was
of these laws
2018.
went into effect on January 1st.
Oh,
That's
okay.
all I'm talking, sorry, I'm not on the 2017 anymore. I moved
Okay.
on to the 2018, all of which are effective January 1st, 2019. All right, next law, SB 1227, which is density bonuses for student housing. It's a new kind of density bonus. The state density bonus law previously applied to dwelling units. Now, with this bill, developers can get a density bonus for student housing of 35% based on either the number of units or the number of beds. That's the first time the density bonus law has applied to beds. So to qualify for this bonus, a project has to meet a number of requirements. First, at least 20% of the units have to be available to lower income students for at least 55 years. And all of the student housing units have to be used exclusively for students enrolled full-time at an accredited institution of higher education. And the developer has to enter into some sort of operating agreement with that university or a master lease that all the units will be occupied as student housing units. So it's not just a developer coming in saying, trust me, there'll be students there. They actually have to show us a master lease with, and we've got 2 universities in the city, so maybe one of them will enter such an agreement, but it's not as simple as it sounds at first blush. This is mandatory. The city is obligated to update its own density bonus ordinance to comply with this requirement.
All right, so I've got an abuse question. Is the student housing only applicable to universities or education facilities? Could somebody take their ADU and say, I'm making it my student housing unit?
Well, there's a minimum number of units, I believe,
Okay.
to qualify. And again, they have to show some sort of contract with the university. So, yeah, I think they'd have a hard time doing that. Anyway, that one is mandatory. The next one is not. The next one is another kind of density bonus. This authorizes the city to adopt an ordinance to grant a floor area ratio bonus to affordable housing developments as an alternative to granting density bonuses. This would apply to infill sites or sites near major transit stops. And it would apply if 20% of the units are restricted to very low-income residents for 55 years or more. Our zoning ordinance doesn't currently address floor area ratio. Our general plan does. It's possible that our new zoning ordinance that we'll adopt later this year will have FAR. So I don't know how immediately applicable this would be to Santa Clara, but it is something that as a policy matter the city could decide to implement in the future. The main advantage, the main drive behind creating this kind of bonus is to allow for smaller units. Until now, all density bonuses were you get an extra number of units per acre. But if instead the bonus is you get an extra 20,000 square feet, a developer could choose to break that up into very small units, micro units even. So this would provide an opportunity for a developer to build more units than he would otherwise under a standard density bonus. At least that's the intent, as I understand it.
Okay, so this would be like units around 250 square feet, something like that, just a real small unit.
In theory, yes. But again, this is not mandatory. We don't have to adopt this. And, we could probably impose some sort of standards on the minimum unit size. It's entirely a policy call at this point. We'll see if that changes in future years.
I'm sorry. How could this be optional? And then is there any number specified for the FAR bonus? Is it 10%, 20%, 50%?
Right. So the prior law we were talking about, the student density bonus, is a modification to Government Code 65915, which says cities shall modify their zoning ordinances to allow for this. This law does not say this. This law says that a city can choose to create a floor area ratio bonus if it wants. It doesn't have to. And because our zoning ordinance doesn't currently have floor area ratios, it would be very hard for us to immediately implement. So it does have numbers in it. I tried to understand late last night when I was reading the statute. It made my head hurt. But basically, you take the number of square feet and then you multiply by 2,250. In calculating the floor area ratio bonus pursuant to this section, the allowable gross residential floor area in square feet shall be the product of all of the following amounts. A, the allowable residential base density in dwelling units per acre. B, the site area in square feet divided by 43,560, which is the number of square feet in an acre. And C, 2,250. At 11 p.m. last night, it just didn't click. So you get a bonus. Someone smarter than me can explain the math.
Do they have a definition of what a unit is in this case, since it's going to be possibly micro units and other very low square footage homes?
It doesn't specify. It just says if you're providing 20% or more of units that are restricted to very low income residents, that you'd be eligible for this. But again, it's optional. The city doesn't have to do it.
It pretty much allows you
Under
to.
the building code, there is a definition of a dwelling unit, so it does have to have a full bathroom and bathing facilities. It has to have a kitchen with a stove.
Per unit?
Per unit, independent,
communal-
right, and sleeping quarters. I believe some
So
common living
we're
space.
avoiding the case where they could just throw Herman Miller in a warehouse and call it a 400-unit complex. Okay, I just wanted to understand. Thanks.
Yeah, there are certain requirements like that.
Basically, my understanding of it is allows a developer to add another floor or to reduce the amount of green space, so the floor area ratio goes up.
That sounds
basically-
accurate.
Yeah.
Yes. But again, we don't currently do FAR in our zoning ordinance. We'll see what comes out later this year. Wanted to tell you about a few changes to the Housing Accountability Act, which is what I mentioned earlier, the anti-NIMBY law, which requires us to make certain health and safety findings before we can deny a housing development application when it's consistent with both the general plan and the zoning ordinance. This law now imposes this requirement on projects that are inconsistent with the city's zoning ordinance. So that's a big shift. If a project is consistent with the general plan, but inconsistent with the zoning ordinance, the city may have to approve the project or make health and safety findings. This is a big change for Santa Clara because so many projects come in that are PD rezones because we have a zoning ordinance that is not strictly consistent with our general plan. So it's very possible you'll have developers come in and say, look, my project, it's completely consistent with the general plan. I don't want to apply for a PD rezone. Please grant me my approval. Under this law, it is likely we will have to say yes.
But we are updating our zoning code, so.
We are updating our zoning code. The goal is certainly to be consistent between our general plan and zoning ordinance. But in the meantime, it'll be interesting to see if this gets triggered.
Could you?
If I could weigh on some
Yes.
clarification with the zoning ordinance update, though. We're intending to bring forward some districts that comply more with what our general plan anticipates, but there isn't funding or intention to actually change zoning on particular sites. So it's the code would create districts that are more in conformance to what we've created with our general plan. But if you look at an individual site, that particular district may comply with, is not intended to be changed through the ordinance itself. Like when we do a zoning code update, we're creating some districts perhaps that don't exist, which is why many people bring forward PD zonings, because we don't have a zoning district that's compatible with the densities that would be available in the general plan. That being said, though, many times we have zoning districts that aren't compatible regardless of there not being a appropriate district, but rather there's just nonconformance between what the zoning is and the general plan is. That those areas of nonconformance will still be there. So this may have some relevance for us, is what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Has there been some recent projects that would fall under this that you can think of?
Well, I mean, I mentioned Pomeroy that was denied. That was a PD rezone. So if this law had been in effect when that project came forward, we'd have to look at that. I don't know whether or not this would have been triggered. It's possible. It might have been harder to deny it.
So if the general plan wants more density, but the codes don't allow it, then they have this process now to basically say, go ahead and approve it.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
We can still require them to comply with objective standards and criteria of the zoning ordinance to the extent it's not inconsistent with the general plan.
And would that be something that was like not coming in front of us because the applicant would just reference this and it would be handled internally by the planning department?
Well, I mean, all building construction in the city has to go through architectural review. And so depending on the type of project, it would go to architectural committee or receive staff level review. But other than architectural review, it's possible some projects would not need any entitlement.
Okay, thank you.
Xander, can you just clarify when
Yes.
on that point that if it complies with the general plan, but it's not consistent with the zoning, and we can still have them comply with those objective standards, would that be the existing zoning that's in place?
Yes.
Okay, because that seems odd, because like if we have a higher density, usually the case is it's a higher density general plan designation, but it might be a lower density in R1, something of that nature remaining, but it's, so those standards really aren't compatible with higher density.
The law calls out density as something saying that where there's a general plan zoning ordinance inconsistency, you follow the general plan in this context.
But then how would you apply the development standards if they were a lower density to that high density?
I agree.
Okay,
That's an
so
excellent question.
Okay.
We'll have to navigate this one
If it was
carefully.
a comparable zoning district to reflect the general plan, then that would make sense.
That sounds reasonable to me, but it's not what the law says. So we'll have to navigate that one carefully. All right. Speaking of general plan zoning ordinance inconsistency, there is a law making some changes to charter cities. SB 1333. This clarifies numerous provisions in state law that do apply to charter cities. And this is a reaction to a 2017 case that arose in Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach adopted a specific plan that was inconsistent with its housing element. The specific plan provided for less housing than what the housing element contemplated for a project site. And so some housing advocates sued, and the court held that as a charter city, Huntington Beach did not have to have strict consistency between its specific plan and its housing element. So this is a response to that case. And it says that actually your specific plans do have to be consistent with your housing element. You have to follow the state law processes for general plan adoption and amendment, same for specific plans. You have to follow state law provisions on development agreements. Obviously, you have to follow the adoption and review process for housing elements. A lot of this we already knew. So when I first looked at this, I thought it was relatively innocuous. But I didn't include everything. There's a long list of, I won't bore you with all the things that charter cities have to comply with. Problem is, I almost fell on my seat last night when we hit that last item, consistency of the zoning ordinance and general plan. There's now an express change in the law that says all cities, including charter cities, must achieve consistency between their general plan and zoning ordinance. This is something we have relied upon for years in Santa Clara, the exemption that charter cities have. So we didn't need express conformance. Now we do. What the law says is that by January 1st, 1974, cities shall achieve consistency between their zoning ordinance and general plan. Obviously, this law has been on the books for a while, but it used to have a subdivision E that said this shall not apply to charter cities. Now that subdivision says it does apply to charter cities. It also says that when a city's zoning ordinance goes out of conformance with its general plan, the city must amend the zoning ordinance within a reasonable time. We are already in the process of amending our zoning ordinance, so this is already underway. The existence of this law may prompt us to step on the gas a bit. But the days of our zoning ordinance and general plan being out of whack, this ends that.
So this stops kind of like the puzzle pieces, oh, we're going to fit this here, but we're going to put this here kind of thing? I mean, is that kind of what this is going to stop?
I'm not sure what you mean by puzzle
So
pieces,
like,
frankly.
for example, like, so something on El Camino, we're going to have something mixed use, and then next door, it's something smaller, and then three buildings down, we're going to do another high-density development, but then next to that, we'll say we put a Jack in a Box or something. I mean, is that kind of like what we're trying to avoid is the...
Well,
it
it's
is?
more the fact that our general plan was adopted in 2010 and updated in 2015, and our zoning ordinance was adopted in the 60s.
Okay.
And so we have provisions in the zoning ordinance that say, you know, this parcel shall be used for this, and our general plan says something entirely different.
Okay.
And you can't meet the standards of both the zoning ordinance and general plan currently. So everything rezones to plan development, which is just basically, you know, the standards that we say apply. We're going to now need to be careful about having the zoning ordinance match the general plan. Whatever it says on this parcel in the zoning ordinance needs to match the general plan for each parcel.
Okay. A little clearer.
So then, does this, would the city then have to proactively rezone parcels that are inconsistent then with the general plan?
All they did was change one line. I don't know. That seems like a heavy lift. But it's something we'll have to look into.
So I was going to ask a similar question because Ms. Bria mentioned earlier about how we're not going to have 100% consistency, so that's no longer going to be allowed?
It's a good question. I mean, again, this was all in reaction to this Huntington Beach case. I'm sure the legislature, when they added this one line, didn't realize the kind of sweeping effect it could have on charter cities. I can't imagine that this means we're going to have to go parcel by parcel and rezone every parcel in the city. Nevertheless, it says within a reasonable time, we shall make our zoning ordinance consistent with the general plan. So you know, again, I read it at 11 p.m. last night, and you know, the pit of my stomach just dropped out because it's going to take some time to figure out how we're going to implement this.
3194 says that if there's an inconsistency, it's the GP that trumps ZO.
I'm sorry, you said
The
3194?
previous one, 3194.
Oh, right,
GP
yes.
trumps zoning.
Mhm.
Okay. Got it, thank you.
That is correct, for density. Yes,
Density.
that's correct. Okay.
Just quick question. So I know a lot of times you were referencing going smaller, but let's say if a specific plan had more housing than the general plan had originally indicated, that wouldn't be an issue for this SB 1333, correct?
Well, I mean, we have maximum densities as well, so it could be an issue, yeah.
Could be an issue either way.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So basically, we have to have our districts to bring it into compliance with the general plan.
Yes, and it may be a matter of, you know, changing the definition of what R1 means or R3 means, you know, so that all parcels that are zoned that, but I don't know.
Okay.
It's going to take some time to figure that one out.
That's why we have you here.
All right, so part 2 is due process. I would certainly give you the option of taking a break, or if you heard enough for one night, I don't mind coming back and doing it another night. If you want to charge forward, I'm happy to knock this out as well, since it's sort of a light agenda.
I don't mind getting this pushed out because I'm guessing maybe we'll have light sessions for the next.
Our next meeting is canceled. The first meeting in February does not exist. It wasn't listed as a regular meeting, so this will, late February will be the next meeting, and Diana Fazeli will be covering that meeting, so I won't be here to give it. So you're looking at March at the earliest for us, for our continuation.
But I would like to get an update on the Architectural Review Committee.
Is that the pleasure of the commission? You just want to hear about the architectural component and do the due process later?
My personal desire.
I personally would prefer that we cover the whole thing because we never know, with a missed meeting and, or a canceled meeting, the next meeting could go very late. So I'd prefer to do it now.
All right, then I will.
Sounds good to me too.
Yeah.
I will proceed and include the architectural.
With the staff.
Did you want to go home?
No, just go on ahead. You're doing great.
Thank you. All right. Well, for some of the newer commissioners, I've never given this lecture to you. I've received some questions from commissioners on and off about when it is and it is not appropriate to make comments in public to provide your opinions about city issues and projects. And as I mentioned, the city attorney recently gave a memo to the city council raising some due process issues in the context of the city's architectural review process. I don't know if you all have been given a copy of that memo yet, but if not, we will make sure you have it at the end of tonight's meeting. It's a memo drafted by the city attorney, but it's a public document. He didn't make it attorney-client privileged. And it raises some issues about the architectural review process. Before I get to that, let me just give a few fundamentals about due process, and I apologize for those of you for whom this is review. You're, of course, familiar with the Due Process Clause in both the U.S. and California constitutions. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Santa Clara Code of Ethics and Values contains a similar statement. It says that the city will extend equal opportunities and due process to all parties in matters under consideration. So, in the context of city government, due process is implicated whenever the city makes a quasi-judicial decision. That's things like conditional use permits, variances, subdivision maps, if you revoke a license or revoke a CUP, and it doesn't come up at Planning Commission, but when you terminate or discipline employees, there's due process implications. That's to be distinguished from legislative matters, such as passing an ordinance affecting the entire city or amending the general plan. There's still due process for legislative matters, but the due process is going to the ballot box and voting out your elected officials if you don't like what they've done. For quasi-judicial decisions, it's more like you're acting like 7 judges on a court. You're applying the law to a set of facts. You're not changing the law or interpreting the law, you're just using a set of standards and then determining whether the set of facts meet those standards to reach your decision. So for quasi-judicial matters, due process protections apply, and those are reasonable notice, a reasonable opportunity to be heard, and that hearing has to be before an impartial decision maker. Now, the notice part of this, that's handled by planning staff for the most part. That's posting things on project sites, that's printing things in the newspaper. Opportunity to be heard, that's just allowing a reasonable amount of time before the relevant body for any interested party to speak and submit evidence. This is also the context where it's important to disclose any ex parte contacts you may have had about a project. If a member of the public comes to speak on a project, or if the applicant comes to their public hearing, they need to know the basis on which you're making your decision. If you meet with project applicants or project opponents and learn something that's not in the public record, you know, if there's something about parking, for instance, that a project opponent tells you and our staff report doesn't talk about parking, and then you make your decision based on the parking situation, well, the applicant hasn't had a chance to rebut that. But if you come to the public meeting and say, just to let you know, I met with a project opponent, we talked about the parking, and I was concerned that there doesn't seem, well, it's a bad example. I met with a project opponent who showed me that there is a parking problem at Site X, something like that. Then they have a chance to rebut that. The applicant can stand up and say, wait a minute, you forgot that, we're using lifts or something. I don't know. Part of due process is explaining the basis for your decision, and that includes disclosing ex parte contacts. But the main thing I want to discuss tonight is what makes up an impartial decision maker. You need to be an impartial decision maker to have fair due process. And that doesn't mean you can't have any pre-existing views. I mean, pre-existing views on general policy issues doesn't create a disqualifying bias. Due process doesn't require that you not have any views or opinions at all. The California Supreme Court once said it would be untenable to insist upon the selection only of decision makers who have never thought about or expressed an opinion on the broad social, economic, or legal issues that inherently underlie an approval. So you're expected to have certain perspectives on how the city should be run. Otherwise, why would you be in public office? But you can't have disqualifying bias. And disqualifying bias means you have a specific prejudice against a person affected, or a bias that's sufficient to impair your ability to decide the matter on appropriate grounds. It can also be simpler than that. It can be that you've expressed an opinion on how you're likely to vote one way or another on a project before it's gone to public hearing and you've heard all the testimony. I'll give you a few examples of where things have gone wrong for public officials. One of the most well-known due process cases is Nasha versus City of Los Angeles. And that concerned a 5-dwelling unit residential project in the Santa Monica Mountains. The project was originally approved by a planning director, but the decision was appealed to the Planning Commission. Before the Planning Commission acted, a planning commissioner wrote an article in the newsletter of her HOA, which was the Studio City Residents Association, calling the project a threat to a wildlife corridor because he perceived it to be in conflict with wildlife migration patterns. So ultimately, he voted against the project along with 2 other planning commissioners, and 3 votes were necessary to deny the project, and so the project was not approved. On review, the court concluded that that newsletter publication and also a statement the commissioner made at a neighborhood meeting about the project resulted in the commission decision being tainted by bias. And the Planning Commission was ordered to throw out its decision and conduct a new hearing.
So in that instance, a disclosure would not have cured the situation.
Right.
That person should have recused.
That's correct. Disclosure is more about letting people know the basis of your decision. This is a situation where somebody has announced their decision before the public hearing ever took place. So you have to do both. Disclose new information you find out, but avoid making statements about how you're likely to vote. Here's another one, Woody's Group versus City of Newport Beach. That's Woody's Wharf Restaurant in the picture. They applied to extend their hours, add some dancing, and install a patio cover. And the Planning Commission approved the request, but the decision was appealed to the City Council. Before the City Council hearing, the council member sent an email to the city clerk stating that he strongly believed that the operational characteristics requested in the application are inconsistent with the existing and expected residential character of the area and the relevant policies of the general plan. This was largely an off-the-cuff statement that a council member made to the city clerk, but he sent it via email. It became a public document. And so after the council member voted to deny the permit, along with other council members, the restaurant sued and alleged impermissible bias. And on review, the court concluded that that email showed that the council member was strongly opposed to the project, and it demonstrated an unacceptable probability of actual bias. The court nullified the council's action based on that one email. This case is also about an email. It's fairly similar to the last one. There was a site outside Orinda where someone applied for a residential development permit to Contra Costa County. The Board of Supervisors denied the permit primarily because it didn't have necessarily development permits from other agencies. It needed a permit from Caltrans to develop. But after the project was denied, it was discovered that one of the supervisors had sent an email to Caltrans that was critical of the applicants and their project, and it also asked for Caltrans' help in shutting down an existing sewer line used by the applicants. So one of the council members had basically encouraged Caltrans to deny their permit, and then that was the basis for the Board of Supervisors denying the project. The court concluded that that email demonstrated the type of bias prescribed by NASHA. NASHA was, of course, this case 2 slides ago. So all of which is to say, be careful about pre-decisional statements. But it's not just bias for or against a project you have to worry about. You also have to worry about bias for or against a particular applicant, and whether or not you're tempted by any personal or pecuniary interests. When I say personal interests, though, I mean non-financial personal interests. You're familiar with the Political Reform Act, which governs financial interests, but if you just have a bias against a particular applicant or for a particular applicant, that too can be a violation of due process and can create what's called a common law conflict of interest. The most famous case dealing with a common law conflict of interest is Clark versus City of Hermosa Beach. And that was just an application to construct a residential duplex. And let me get my notes in front of me. And what happened in that case was this couple, Doug and Cheryl Clark, applied to the City of Hermosa Beach for approval of plans to demolish an existing apartment building and put up a 2-unit condominium duplex. So here's a photo of Hermosa Beach. In the center of the slide, there's a dot with a stem pointing down to a property on a major arterial roadway. If we move in a little closer, you see the Clark family complex is on the left, and that's where the Clarks wanted to put up their tall duplex. The neighbors didn't like the plans because the new duplex was going to be larger and taller than some of the existing, the neighboring structures. Also would have blocked ocean views. And one of the residents that was impacted was a guy named Robert Benz, and that's his lot on the right side of the slide. So he wrote a letter in opposition to the project, and he organized the neighborhood to oppose the project. But the Planning Commission couldn't find any basis to deny it because the structure complied with all the setback requirements and it complied with all the height requirements for that zone. Now, during this time, relations between the Clarks and Mr. Benz got very adversarial. Mr. Benz was known to walk by the Clark house and get into verbal altercations with the Clarks and even yelled at their children. So apparently after a late night of drinking with his buddies, Robert Benz stumbled down to the Clark property and in a symbolic gesture of how he really felt about the Clarks and their project, he proceeded to pee all over their flower beds. That being said, the Clarks were going through the approval process. They got their Planning Commission approval, but the project was then appealed to the City Council. In the meantime, there had been a City Council election, and guess who got elected? This guy, Robert Benz. So when the Clarks project was appealed to the City Council denied the project 3-2, with Mr. Benz voting with the majority to deny the project. So not surprisingly, the Clarks sued over the denial, and on appeal, the court found that there had been impermissible bias. The court decided that the Clarks didn't receive a fair hearing and that Mr. Benz had a common law conflict of interest. He showed his bias against the project in an opposition letter he'd written before the hearing. He showed his bias by what he did to their flower beds. And he was biased because he stood to benefit if the project had been denied, because the denial protected his view of the ocean. And so because of all that, he was not a disinterested, unbiased decision maker.
But we usually recuse ourselves if we're within 500 feet of a project.
Right. Well, this was a unique case because oh no, I stopped it. Could you restart the slideshow for me? Thank you. Mr. Benz lived within 500 feet, but he had a month-to-month lease on his property. And under the Political Reform Act, a month-to-month lease does not constitute a property interest requiring you to recuse yourself. If he'd had a 12-month lease, or if he owned the property, then the Political Reform Act would have required that he knock himself out, absolutely. So this is a little unique of a circumstance, but you know, even if you're not within 500 feet, there are other ways to express bias. So I just need to jump back to slide 23. So all of which to say is, it's important to avoid expressing any pre-commitment. And this can be in statements to developers and residents. It can be statements made in newspapers or newsletters, like that HOA newsletter of that one planning commissioner. It can also be blogs, Facebook posts. It can also be statements made at city council meetings and committee meetings. Now, typically, items come to planning commission and then they go to city council. So in theory, there's no harm in you going and speaking at the city council. But whenever anyone does that, I always express, just be aware, if this gets sent back to the planning commission for some reason, you will be precluding yourself from further participation. I remember at a recent meeting, we had the Gateway Crossings project, and then Commissioner Shahal was on the commission, and we cautioned him, you know, we don't know for sure if this will be at City Council at the next meeting. It might get postponed. If it gets postponed and you participate tonight, you won't be able to participate at City Council. And he chose to take that risk. He did not participate. I'm sorry, he did not abstain. Because you can't act a second time on a project. So also, you need to be careful about statements made at planning commission meetings before the close of public hearings. As you know, we have a very specific process that we follow when going through public hearings. You know, first, there's a staff presentation, then there's questions of staff, then the applicant speaks, then you have questions of applicant, then members of the public speak, then there's a rebuttal, then you close, and then the chance for you to express your opinion. If you express your opinion in that initial questioning, you know, I mean, ask the staff, you know, will there be sufficient parking for this project? But don't, in that initial questioning, say, how can you justify supporting this project because it clearly doesn't have enough parking? You know, you need to be careful that before the public hearing is closed, you don't show your cards because you're not supposed to have made up your mind until the close of the public hearing. So even at a planning commission meeting, there's a possibility of showing pre-commitment. And that brings us to architectural committee decisions. So what the memo says that the city attorney prepared is that when the architectural committee hears an item and then that item is appealed to the planning commission and or the city council, it would be a due process violation for the same persons to make a decision on the project, which means that in the future, when there are appeals from architectural committee decisions that come to planning commission, we will recommend that planning commissioners who previously voted on those projects abstain. This is something the city attorney brought up when he came to the city 2 years ago. He brought it up again when he became the permanent city attorney a year ago. And so we had our new deputy do a lot of research on the issue, and it's contained in great detail in this memo that went to council. But the main provision that you'll need to read as planning commissioners or as architectural committee members is At the bottom of page 3, where it simply says, because of the composition and review of the architectural committee, there is substantial risk that a decision maker will develop and express an opinion on an application that demonstrates that they lack impartiality when the project comes to Planning Commission. So our recommendation going forward will be that you don't act twice on an application.
So thinking, okay, so that's one thing I had a real concern about is if we're acting twice, so we vote here,
Yes.
we pass it, it goes to council, council approves it, then it comes back to architectural review, and let's say, for example, Commissioner Salome and myself, we voted yes on that project, and now we get it before us on architectural review. Isn't that violating due process there because now we're voting on it again? And then if we passed it, it goes back to, that's where I'm a little confused about.
Right, so what I was specifically talking about was the appeal of a project. So you make one decision on the architectural, and they get it appealed to the appeal body, which is the Planning Commission, and then you make the same decision on the architectural, after already saying on the record what you thought of the architectural. The situation you're describing is when a project goes through for entitlements at Planning Commission and City Council, you know, rezone, general plan amendment, and then after that, it goes for architectural approval. You have not yet ruled on architectural approval for that project. So in that context, we wouldn't ask that you abstain. But it is a...
Council often sends things back to ARC after they voted on it.
Yes, well, recognizing that, I think the city attorney is going to recommend changes even in the membership of the architectural committee going forward. But in the meantime, we're recommending abstention where there's a possibility for due process issues.
So we're kind of short-staffed, and so if we don't end up with no quorum, what happens?
Yeah, there's only two of us.
I know that there's a agenda item on the council for Tuesday that is slightly revising the architectural committee quorum requirements. There was a document that went out sometime around 2003 that stated that, sorry, let me back up. In 2001 or 2002, the City Council adopted procedures for the architectural committee. Those procedures said that 2 members of the committee must be present to have a quorum, any 2 members. Sometime after that, the procedures were changed. We can't figure out how because it wasn't a council action, but the procedures were changed to state, in order to have a quorum, there must be 2 members present, one of which must be the council member. We don't know how that got put in there. But anyway, they're changing it to simply say 2 members must be present, any 2 members.
Okay, so quorum in the architectural committee, but what about like if it came back to Planning Commission and, you know, we have 5 people here and if two of us had to recuse and we no longer have quorum?
The administrative inconvenience of having to postpone something is not a justification for a due process violation. It would have to be continued.
It has to be continued.
It would have to be continued in that context. If 2 members are conflicted, then the other 5 would act. So if one of those 5 is absent, so you only have 4 present. Well, you only need 4 for a quorum on this body. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like right now.
Would need a unanimous vote.
But you need a unanimous vote, yes.
But there's 2 appeals like that property and, you know, we've seen it happen then. So how does it differ from appeal? Because if there's a simple appeal, then the same body can hear it twice, right? I mean, like there have been properties like in near Mauricia, you know, the house remodeling that came back again and again. The council heard it several times.
Well, but it's not hearing its own, it's not a hearing an appeal of its own decision. The point is, the person who's making a decision on the appeal can't be the same person that made the initial decision. That doesn't satisfy due process. if, you know, if I go to court and a judge says, I've lost my case, I'll appeal it to the next court. But it can't be the same judge. If that judge gets appointed to that higher court, that same judge can't rule because he's already ruled on the initial decision. So
I don't want to get into nitty-gritty, but it was a neighbor who opposed the council approval, so therefore, and then it came back to council. The homeowner applied for remodeling, it got approved, and then the neighbor came in and said, no, we want to appeal this, and so it came back to the council. But, so in a situation like that,
But it wasn't the council.
Well, I think what you're saying is one of the council members was sitting on the architectural committee and also heard the appeal. That there was an objection made.
Oh, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Well, no.
Well, there was an objection on one of the appeals that I believe it was Teresa O'Neill it involved Councilmember O'Neill. I remember there was something of that nature, but.
Well, you know. We're changing the process going forward, and it is very possible there will be change up in the makeup of the body as well.
I did want to add, as part of the zoning code update, staff was working on proposing some changes to the ARC, irregardless of due process conflicts. It is a fairly unique setup here in Santa Clara where we have individuals who sit on other hearing bodies that then preside on another land use body. So there are, and recognizing now the city attorney's office has recommended some due process, constraints around our current configuration. Staff's working on proposing some configurations so that we recognize that in the interim, as we try and deal with appeals, with people recusing themselves from previous participation, perhaps in a different setup for the Architectural Review Committee is necessary. And so staff is working on a proposal that we will be bringing forward to you all at our next Planning Commission hearing, which is on the 27th. So we're actively considering alternatives, doing research. That's actually why Ella Karachin is here in the audience, because she's working on that with myself and John Davidson so that we can bring something forward to you that is more aligned, and working with the city attorney's office on some of these concerns that we have, in addition to other sort of procedural best practices.
Thank you.
Isn't the 27th meeting?
No, February. I think it's February 27th. It's the end of February meeting. Maybe I got that date wrong.
Okay. I just wanted to point out the obvious. Since we're down, it seems like last year and a half we've been perpetually down at least one person. It might be.
Could you speak a little closer? I'm sorry.
Oh. Since we've been perpetually down like one person, it seems like for the last year and a half, it might be better like if we get appeals and two people that were on the architectural review can't vote, go by a majority vote, not by a 4-member vote.
That seems entirely reasonable. However, the 4-vote requirement is in the charter, 1003.
It's in the charter?
So we would have to amend the charter to change that, which requires vote of the residents.
Okay.
So the charter says, our charter says that we're only allowed to have so many people on the architectural committee, or?
No. The architectural committee provisions are not in the charter.
In the zone.
I'm referring
Zoning,
to the number of votes that are required to take any action at Planning Commission, which is Charter Section 1003.
Okay. So if it's just Commissioner Salome and I, and we're sitting there and we have to vote, like we were saying, oh, well, we would have to come to a consensus together to actually approve this.
That's right.
Yes.
In the ideas you guys are having, is there ideas to expand it to get that off vote, like the 3 or a 7 to make it so
sure,
you can't have a majority?
A bigger commission, you mean?
Yeah.
Like a committee of 5 architectural?
Well, more like 3. If we're going to lose city council member, maybe a historical commission
Landmarks.
member, or someone applicable to the task of reviewing architecture aesthetics would be helpful.
Because it's like
Recap, there are options being explored, including not non-planning commissioners serving. There would just be, like, say, 3 members of the public or 3 architects. There's a lot of things being looked at for right now, so.
Many of our neighboring cities actually have 3 tiers of review, the first being a staff-level public hearing, appealable to Planning Commission. Certain items would go to Planning Commission, certain items would go to a staff-level public hearing, so not, other items would go to the City Council. And then here in Santa Clara, we also have the opportunity for individuals to appeal to the Planning Commission and then appeal again to the City Council. So there's some challenges with people appealing multiple times. So all of this is being considered, and we'll present some options to you with a staff recommendation. And we're fleshing all of this out, so I'm not prepared to lay this all out for you today, but we're considering a lot of things, researching best practices as well. And recognizing that we have also seen vacancies with seats and some of the challenges that we have with getting members, from the community and appointed people to stay engaged as well.
The community, from what we have seen, the community loves that aspect of being able to sit one-on-one with commissioners or whatever it will be. They like that ability to actually sit there and talk to somebody and really connect with them at a table instead of, having a dais separated with them. So that's...
Interested in your feedback on also things like how the meeting is set up or run.
Yeah.
But just talking more generally about public hearing, still keeping a public hearing, similar to the Architecture Review Committee is still a public hearing, which we duly notice everyone following our public outreach policy. So keeping consistent with the noticing aspect and having a hearing. But I hear what you're saying from the format being more informal and you expressing that that's preferable.
Like every 2 people we had that one time with that whole garage issue, I mean, they were like, oh, thank God, somebody that we can actually communicate with on a personal level instead of being behind a fence, kind of thing. That was, I think, one of the best things we've gotten out of that is just being closer to the community and hearing more on a personal basis.
And I don't think anyone's suggesting, disbanding an architectural committee or getting rid of hearings or shrinking it, but possibly enlarging. We'll have to see.
Yeah, shrinking would be a problem since if right now we're at 2, you would have, nobody. If one person gets sick, it's done.
Certainly not. But
that's why we're going to bring something forward to you in February, and hopefully we can rectify this in the near term, so we aren't all working under kind of duress of not being able to be sick or absent or whatnot.
Okay.
All right. Is this dead horse beaten? Let me just close it out. If you're concerned that you may have a disqualifying bias, the best advice I can give you is consult with city staff or me. If you're in doubt, you can abstain. Of course, what we're talking about here mostly is, the chance that you've accidentally made a statement somewhere about a potential project. So yeah, talking to staff is a good idea, but if it is a situation where, the bell is rung, you've expressed a firm opinion about something in a public situation, the best thing would be just to abstain. And when I say abstain, that means not only don't participate on the dais, but also don't then call your fellow commissioners and say, hey, here's how you should vote. I mean, that's not something you do anyway, but abstention should be complete abstention. And then just leave the chambers as you would with a Political Reform Act conflict. The usual quote from Mark Twain, always do right, this will gratify some and astonish the rest. And that is all for that.
I got one question about Facebook posts.
Yes.
So about a month ago for Gateway Crossings, I made a Facebook post that says, anybody that wants to talk about this, hear about it, I suggest you come down to the Planning Commission meeting. One, because look at our attendance. Trying to get people active in this. So is that
entirely appropriate?
Appropriate? Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. What would not be appropriate is
stating your position.
Yes. Okay. This project is good/bad, whatever. Okay. Or I'm very concerned about certain things about it. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Come out with your red vests.
Let's skip the red vests. Yeah. Other questions? I'm happy to play Stump the Attorney as long as you'd like.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Okay, I'll throw a last question in. Is there anyone that could review a social media post from the city that we want to maybe have it pre-read over?
Pre-screened?
Yeah.
I would much rather read something before you've posted it than
fight it
once
afterwards,
it's
yeah.
Exhibit A in the lawsuit. So that's just a personal preference.
That's great.
Okay, thank you, Xander. All right, now we're on to reports of commission, board, liaison, and committees. Anyone have any announcements? Commissioner Becker?
So I guess this is where I would probably, yeah, reports, commission, board, liaison, committee. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm in the right section. Well, this is about, in my neighborhood, I've gotten a few complaints about this, and lately I've been taking the bus often. And when I take bus 81 on Benton towards White and Las Palmas, people have complained that it's getting harder and harder because of the traffic to cross Benton now. And I'm wondering if that is something that the city has been looking into to put a crosswalk in that region for people who do take the bus on that area.
We can look into that and talk to the traffic division and get back to you, but
Yeah,
offhand, I don't know.
Okay, that'd be great, yeah.
Any other announcements? Okay, board or committee assignments?
Can we get an update on filling the vacancy? We looked up the website and I couldn't see any posting.
That is going to city council at next Tuesday's meeting, I believe, to open up the recruitment, but I think it's going to close on February 21st or something, at least. So it's a short turnaround time.
Got it, thank you.
Anything from ARC? No, okay. Travel and training reports. There are 3 things that are coming up. One is Leadership Santa Clara. There's a flyer in your packet talking about there's a spot for a planning commissioner to attend Leadership Santa Clara. I guess the city would cover the costs of that program? Yes.
Yes, and it is available for 1 commissioner, and they just wanted us to let you know that it is during a daytime. There's a block of time. So just to see the dates, and I did send you all an email as well.
Yeah.
So you see the sessions are from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. On the dates specified.
Okay, Commissioner Williams had asked to be included in that program. So is there anyone else who wants to participate in leadership? No?
You know, I was thinking about it, but if he wants to go, I'll wait till next year, that's fine.
He did express.
Take the leadership together?
We took it a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
Well, you've already taken it. You shouldn't take it again.
It's,
Leadership Santa Clara?
yeah, but I don't remember it being that many days.
No, it's always been a fairly,
Yeah.
considerable program. And there's a
go-
graduation ceremony and everything, so.
The graduation and everything, yeah.
It is intense training, so.
Yeah. You go visit the
But
the
as long as
fire
he's-
department and the police department and all the facilities on work.
Yeah, working for
remember
a
that.
living.
Okay.
You have to make sure he's available for the time commitment that's on.
Yeah, so could you, I'm,
So is there a backup person in case?
I'll be the backup person.
okay. So
'Cause it's
if you
all
could
of those
just
days,
check
right?
with Commissioner Williams
All
to
of
see
those
if
days.
he could commit to all those dates, because
Right.
if he can't commit to those dates, then I'd rather have Commissioner Kelly attend.
My schedule is flexible. I usually can work around it.
Okay, the other things are, Elizabeth had sent out the trainings, League of California Cities, March 6th to 8th in Long Beach, and the APA, April 13th to 16th at Moscone. That's the national APA, correct? Does anyone want to attend any of those?
I want to go to the national, I just not sure what days yet, but if I go, I'd prefer to stay overnight because I don't want to try to be there like for early morning classes. Do the drive up, if that's okay.
And I would like to attend that. Anybody else? Okay. Right, so we can move on to, and you see the budget here. I think the budget was in your packet of
Yes,
how much
it's-
money we
it's,
have
So the
left.
balance right now is $6,975. So we would need to confirm if you were gonna, if you need reservations for the hotel, who all, and you could let us know, copy Elizabeth and myself. But is there, right now, we're looking at how many people? We need to
Two
do
of
both.
us for the APA in San Francisco.
Okay, all right,
And I won't be staying in San Francisco.
okay.
I'm not sure if it'll just be one night or 2 nights. I just want to make sure that if I'm there, I'll be able to just go start the program like right at first thing in the morning.
Okay. Anyone else? Commissioner Salam, I know you had mentioned attending.
I would love to go to these things. Unfortunately, I can't
Okay.
afford the
time-wise.
schedule.
Okay.
Kind of time right now.
What days is San Francisco one? Weekend, weekday?
Usually it's a combination of both, but I don't.
Yeah,
usually
it's,
that's
I
when-
think on a Thursday and it ends on a Sunday.
It starts on the 13th, which is Saturday, and it ends,
Is that May or is it
it's April.
April?
And then it goes to the 16th, which is a Tuesday. So it's 2 weekend days and 2 weekday days.
I thought is do the weekend, that way you don't lose your.
Yeah,
normal-
because
So why don't we do this?
Put me as a-
We
as a
probably
maybe
need
if-
to vote to approve spending the money.
Mhm.
So why don't we vote to approve sending 3 people,
Up to 3 people.
up to 3 people?
Budget allow it?
Well, we have $6,900 left in the budget until June 30th. And this is in April, so I don't see much else on the
And
horizon.
We're allocating as we go now, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
So is there a motion?
I'll make
Motion
it.
to 3 people?
Yeah.
3 people, National Planning Convention with, I guess, me, the only one wanting to stay at least 1 or 2 nights there.
Okay, so I don't know what registration fees are, but let's
They're about
approve.
$735 per person.
Okay,
And then the rooms are usually about 250. We have
Yeah.
to stay, and then there's per diem per day, which is, I think, about $112, somewhere around there. And then there's gas, unless you're going to take other transportation, we would reimburse
so
for that
probably about
mileage.
So then
$1,500 per
I
person.
might need to stay up there if I don't have a car
So
by
pro-
April. So that might be a possibility.
Probably like
consideration.
$1,500 per person,
Yeah.
times 3 is $4,500, so we have the budget. So I
Okay,
motion to spend up to $4,500 to send 3 people to the National APA.
there's also the League of Cities. I wasn't sure if anyone else was interested in that.
Yeah, that was March 6th to 8th in Long Beach. Okay. So motion made by me, I guess,
Second?
seconded by Commissioner Ikezi. Are you going to bring it up? Yeah, to send 3 people.
And for a new person, the Long Beach is a great one for the new people.
And he said he was interested in that one, right? The Long Beach?
That's a League of Cities Academy, Planning Commissioners Academy.
That's the League of Cities. Yeah, he did say that he was interested in that.
And there's always some good classes, but it's great for the beginners too.
So,
You want to authorize one that, we estimated that costs about $1,275. But there would also be the per diem, so it was
Yeah.
the food.
okay, well, let's add
Because
to, okay,
Probably
let's
about
vote on this one
1,500
first.
as well.
And
by
then
the
we
time-
can vote on League of Cities and send 1 person for like $1,500 to that. That would still leave us budget. Okay,
Can
so vote
I
on
have
this one.
can I comment on that?
Yeah.
I think you might be overspending, but I would like a friendly suggestion to the motion to allocate more for the Long Beach trip if it requires it, and have one less person go to San Francisco so that you can actually get coverage on both, rather than saying have all three go to one and then not be able to afford the other.
Well, what I'm saying is that if we allocate 1,500 to 4 trips, that's 6,000. That's less than what
Yeah,
our budget
okay, that's
has.
fine, as long as
Yeah.
it fits that.
Yeah, if it's our
cost.
budget.
But I think Long Beach is going to be more expensive.
That conference is for Planning Commissioner Academy, so it's got a specific focus. So the existing commissioners may not need it as much as, yourself or Commissioner Williams or Commissioner Becker.
Okay, so we're currently voting on the APA conference, 3 people. Okay.
I make a motion to allocate $1,500 for the League of City training
For one person.
for one person.
Oh, we had second. She
1,500.
she made the motion. We need a second. Yeah. I'll second it. Okay, passes. All right, now we're on to our budget update.
Well, I think we covered budget. About $975 with those expenditures, if those are fully executed.
All right.
It's the cost of the reprint on the credit cards, of the business cards actually been,
Yes,
okay.
that's been removed from that total.
Okay. So upcoming agenda items.
So as I had mentioned in the study session, staff will be bringing forward on the February 27th, our next meeting, a proposal for modifications to the ARC, the Architecture Committee. Similarly, for that hearing, there is a potential that we may want to do a study session on the El Camino Real specific plan. On January 29th, staff will be doing a presentation for an item that's actually scheduled on the regular meeting for the City Council to provide an update to them on the El Camino Real specific plan, as well as get direction on lane and right-of-way configurations related to that, to El Camino Real, as well as a draft land use plan. So after going to City Council, we will be coming to Planning Commission, and the February date seems like a logical one, but I'll also have to check with the number of other items to see if it's the appropriate hearing, or perhaps we'll bring it forward at a March hearing for a study session on El Camino Real.
I'm sorry, I lost you. You said it's going to council before Planning Commission?
Correct. It is going to City Council on January 29th, but it is in the context of the regularly scheduled meeting. It's actually not a separate study session, for staff to give an update and for the council to weigh in on right-of-way, as well as the draft land use plan as currently prepared by staff.
Okay, I see. And then I heard Gateway Crossings was postponed for council. Do you know when that's going to come before council?
I believe it's the 19th?
I heard it was February something now.
February 19th was the last I'd heard.
Okay.
So, correct. Some more time will be needed for the applicant to make modifications to proposal to respond to the community. The community meeting for that project, specifically to get outreach with the Old Quad Association, is on next week, next Wednesday, January 16th. So they have requested that the item be heard at a later date than February 5th, which was the date that had been identified when it had gone to City Council for consideration. So the date currently identified is February 19th for that item, for the Gateway Crossings item to go to City Council.
Okay. I think that's everything. Motion to adjourn.
No, I have one more question, then I pushed this button, but
Oh,
it
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
seem to show up. Is there an update or any changes to the dinner with the city council? No changes? Okay.
No, I think the last email you received from Elizabeth, that's confirmed.
Good, thank you.
What date was that again? February 13th?
February 9th.
Mine says February 19th.
Yeah, I was wondering if that conflicted with one of the one of the sessions that the members are going to. Gosh, February 19th just seems like it was a date that we've already heard for other activities. I don't remember. Do you know?
But we'll send that to
We'll
you in
figure
the
it out.
morning
Okay,
to
thank you.
confirm. I believe it's the, okay, it's, Rena confirmed it's the 19th.
What's the confirmed date?
February 19th. At normal time?
I believe it's at 6 p.m.
Okay. Okay.
Before you adjourn, just while we're still on city council items. No, I wasn't making a motion. While we're still on city council items, I should just mention, on December 20th, the city council adopted an emergency ordinance prohibiting
Scooters.
motorized scooters within the city of Santa Clara.
I just bought one.
That are part of a shared service. You can ride your own scooter.
okay.
But Bird and Lime and similar services, Bird Rides contacted the city the week of the 12th of December and announced that they'd be immediately deploying in the city. So while the city doesn't want to necessarily prohibit these, they want to establish some sort of regulations before just letting them go everywhere. So the city council has banned them for the time being.
Do you know when the moratorium expires?
Yes. The initial moratorium is for 45 days, and so it will expire on February 3rd. There is already a council item scheduled for January 29th to extend the moratorium for another 10 months, 15 days, out to December 19th. The City Council adopted an emergency ordinance, which was the moratorium for 45 days. It also simultaneously introduced a regular ordinance, which will then have its second reading on Tuesday and go into effect in February. So there's like two separate tracks to do the same thing. That regular ordinance will go into effect on February 14th. All of which to say is, it'll be in effect till December or till we get regulations, whichever comes first. Hopefully significantly
Till
before December.
That's what I had heard. It was
Yes.
out till December, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that was a very long-winded legal way of saying December. I'm a little tired.
Okay, thank you.
And if you're going to be riding the scooters, they still have to have obeyed the helmet laws, correct?
Effective January 1st, no helmet is required under state law to ride a scooter.
Except unless you're under 16 or 18, yeah.
I wear my helmet.
I would wear a helmet too. Okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Play ball.
Whether we're Graticus so that we're not holding on to the connection. That was one of the things they said in the tech support